It's time for our aviation enthusiast, cleared for takeoff, and he's got a riveting story about the flight from hell. Let's hear more from Richard Kaplan.
Thank you, Howie. Flight 697 Jet Airways departed Mumbai in India. Routine flight, but the pilots did something that wasn't routine. They forgot to pressurize the aircraft. And 100+ passengers suffered injuries ranging from bloody noses to bloody ears. Why is pressurizing an airplane so important, you might wonder? The answer is very simple. Planes fly at an average altitude of around 36,000 feet. Now, if you were to pressurize the aircraft, you pressurize the aircraft to an altitude of around 9,000 feet, which equalizes the air in the aircraft so you're able to breathe and function properly. Without that, you have yourself a situation where the aircraft rapidly depressurizes, your ears pop, you go through hypoxia and various other illnesses, and it can even be deadly, Howie. I happen to have on my cell phone here, if my producer can home in on this. This was Jet Airways Flight 522, which crashed into a hilly area after 3 hours of being incommunicado. The reason why they weren't able to communicate with the airplane, Howie, is the pilots forgot to pressurize it. 121 passengers were on board, everyone perished. It is vital that airlines have checklists. This is why the federal government regulates the airlines, and the FAA regulates the airlines to have these checklists that they go through. Before every flight, you have a pre-flight, you have flight, and so forth. You go through your checklist, you make sure that the aircraft is pressurized to the proper pressure, you log your flight, and you track your flight. One example, let's say, for example, we have a flight going to Tampa, Flight 65, JetBlue Airways. You know you're going to be flying for 3.5 hours. Your average altitude will probably be around 32,000 to 35,000 feet. You want to pressurize the aircraft for 9,000 feet. So this way the passengers can breathe properly, they have oxygen, everything functions smoothly, Howie. Without that, you have rapid depressurization, as I mentioned, where you have hypoxia, your ears pop, and you ultimately die because you can't breathe. This is a very serious situation, and I hope to God that Jet Airways learns from this, that you have to pressurize the airplane. You have to. It's a very simple procedure. It's a procedure that is done constantly. We see it all the time on airliners before we board the passenger, before the passengers even get on the airplane. The pilots pressurize the plane. It is that important, Howie.
And Richard, I can just imagine the lawsuits they're going to take. Because think about it. These passengers had blood coming from their nose, blood coming out of their ears. They must have been severe agony. So I got to imagine these passengers who were in a traumatic, painful situation, lawsuits are going to be coming against this airline.
Absolutely, Howard. There'll be lawsuits. The airline's already in trouble. The airline is financially bankrupt.
Oof.
3 of India's major carriers, Indigo, Jet Airways, and I believe even Air India is looking for a buyer. The Indian aviation industry on a whole is facing a financial crisis. The government is what's funding Air India. If you go to JFK, you probably wonder, how is Air India able to afford these new jets? It's because the government is funding them. If it wasn't for the government, Air India would be out of business and you wouldn't even have flights to India. You'd have to rely on airlines like United or American. So it's a very big deal, Howie, and unfortunately the airlines have to catch up. They have to realize that to function, you need to have function in the cockpit. You need to have situational awareness. Without that, you do not have a flight.
But Richard, I have to say, the thing about this story is, thank God, despite the pilot not pressurizing the cabin, thank God there was no fatalities on this flight. And yes, there'll be lawsuits, and yes, people suffered a horrific experience, but thank God there was no fatalities on this flight.
The reason there were no fatalities is he was 45 minutes outside of Mumbai. 45 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a lot when you're on an airplane. And believe me, as we just saw, 45 minutes, your ears popped, you have bloody ears, you have a bloody nose. Had they been 3 hours into the flight like Helios was, you would have everybody unconscious or dead. And you would have a dead stick aircraft, which is what we had with Helios. And what's even sadder is that the Greek military was dispatched and there was nothing they can do. They had fighter jets escorting the airplane and they saw the pilots slumped over. There was nothing they could do.
So it was just good fortune that they were less than an hour from landing, and thank
Absolutely.
God they landed the plane and the people survived.
Absolutely, Howie, absolutely. Had they not been an hour or more out, it would have been, we would be looking at a very different situation.
Excellent, Richard. Great report, and we look forward to another cleared for takeoff next week.
Absolutely.
That was excellent.